He leaned in across the table, eyes locked on mine, jaw tight with arrogance. "You don't intimidate me," he said. "She's mine now." I didn't blink. I didn't flinch. I reached into my inner coat pocket and placed a folded document on the table between us. "Then I assume you've read the agreement," I said. He paused. The air shifted. His smirk faded. "What agreement?" I slid the paper toward him. "The one that requires a signed prenup to access her trust fund." His face turned the color of chalk. I leaned in slightly and held my gaze. "Now smile for the rehearsal photos, or walk home." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. He saw it in my eyes. I wasn't bluffing and I wasn't asking. "My name is Silas Boone. I'm a father, a husband, and a retired military attorney. My life has been built on principle, loyalty, and protecting the people I love. I've seen men lie under oath, betray their families, ruin lives for money and power. But I never thought I'd see that same slick grin sitting across from me, on the face of the man my daughter was about to marry. My daughter's name is Evin. She's the kind of young woman who still calls her mom when she's had a rough day and bakes cookies for her neighbors on holidays. She's smart, earned her master's in psychology. She's beautiful, inside and out. But more than anything, Evin is trusting. She believes in the good in people, even when the signs point the other way. That's what made what happened so hard to watch. The man she thought was her forever, Troy Maddox, had just told me I didn't scare him, that I didn't matter, that she belonged to him now, as if she were property, as if she were something to win. And that was the moment I realized I couldn't wait any longer. I had to make a choice. Not as a lawyer, not even as a husband, as a father. But before we get to that moment, the moment that changed everything, you need to understand how we got there. You need to know how someone like Troy weaseled his way into my daughter's heart. How a man like me, trained to detect lies for a living, missed the ones that mattered most. How Evin nearly walked down the aisle with a man who saw her not as a partner, but as a prize. This isn't a story about revenge. This is a story about protection, about what it means to truly defend your family even when they don't see the danger themselves. And if you're a parent, or you've ever loved someone so fiercely you'd risk their anger just to keep them safe, then I think you'll understand why I did what I did. Let's start from the beginning. Before the prenup, before the confrontation, before the mask slipped and I saw the real Troy Maddox. Back when he was just a charming young man shaking my hand in the entryway of our home, calling me sir, and complimenting my daughter's smile like he actually meant it. Back when I thought I was gaining a son and had no idea I'd be writing an agreement to protect my daughter from him. Before everything unraveled, before I saw who Troy really was, I honestly thought I was gaining a son. The house had been filled with laughter for weeks. Laurel was elbow-deep in floral arrangements and color swatches. Evin would sit at the kitchen island scrolling through wedding dress options while telling us about guest lists and song choices. I'd never seen her so excited, or so convinced she was on the right path. And maybe that's what scared me the most, because when my daughter believes in something, she holds on with her whole heart. She doesn't hedge. She dives in completely, no safety net. Evin is 25, my only daughter. I still remember the first time she held my hand, barely able to wrap her fingers around my pinky. I remember the first time she got her heart broken when she was 15 and a boy named Kyle didn't show up for homecoming. She cried in the car the whole way home, and I sat beside her in the driveway for 2 hours without saying a word. I just let her feel it. She's always been sensitive. The good kind of sensitive. The kind that makes her stop and help an injured dog on the side of the road or send handwritten thank you cards for the smallest kindness. But that sensitivity has a downside. People like Troy know how to find it, mimic it, and twist it to their advantage. Laurel and I raised Evin in a home built on discipline, warmth, and honesty. I worked long hours as a defense attorney after I retired from the Army, and Laurel taught middle school English until she opened her own small bookshop downtown. We never gave Evin everything she asked for, but we gave her everything she needed, especially love. When she got into college, we set aside a trust fund she wouldn't even touch until her 30th birthday. It wasn't for flashy things. It was meant to give her security, freedom, a cushion for the life she'd build on her own. That trust fund was never supposed to become a bargaining chip. I met Troy for the first time at a charity fundraiser Evin invited us to. He wore a navy blazer and had the charm turned up to full volume. Firm handshake, eye contact, respectful compliments. He called me sir and asked about my military service. He even quoted a Supreme Court decision during dinner conversation. I'll admit I was impressed. More importantly, Evin seemed happy. She lit up when he entered the room, leaned into his shoulder when they talked, laughed louder than I'd heard her laugh in months. For a while, I let myself believe she'd found a good man. Laurel, though, wasn't convinced. From the beginning, she said something felt off. Not wrong exactly, just rehearsed. She noticed how Troy always answered questions with exactly the right tone, how he never showed uncertainty. Everything he said seemed polished, calculated. I brushed it off. I told her maybe we were just being overprotective. Evin's an adult now. She's allowed to choose her own partner, and Troy hadn't done anything clearly wrong. Not yet. But then small things started to add up. One day, Evin showed up late for dinner with tear-streaked mascara and said she'd just had a stressful week. Another time, she mentioned that Troy didn't like it when she wore certain outfits to work, said they made her too noticeable. She joked about it, but Laurel and I exchanged a look. That wasn't just a preference. That was control. I asked Evin, gently, if everything was okay. She smiled too quickly and told me I was overthinking it, that Troy just likes to protect her. The first real warning came when Troy brought up finances in front of me. We were having dinner on our back patio, just the three of us. He was talking about moving into a new place after the wedding and casually asked, "Will the trust fund help with the down payment, or are you holding on to that until the first kid?" He said it with a laugh, but he watched my reaction too closely. That moment stuck with me. That was the first time I saw the truth starting to peek through his performance. He wasn't just marrying Evin, he was investing in her. That night, after the dishes were washed and Troy had gone home, I sat with Laurel in the living room. She didn't say anything at first, just sipped her tea and stared at the fireplace. Finally, she said, "We need to protect her, even if it means she hates us for a while." I agreed. The thing about being a parent is, sometimes you don't get to be liked. Sometimes you don't get applause. You get resistance, tears, silence. But if it means your child is safe, you do it anyway. And in that moment, I knew something had to be done, quietly, carefully, without tipping Troy off. Because if he was who we feared he was, a confrontation wouldn't protect her, but a contract might. That was the night I made the call. 1 page. No loopholes, no access without accountability, a document that would protect the life we'd built for our daughter from a man we barely knew, and were beginning to fear. And I knew I would hand it to him face to face, at the exact moment when he thought he'd already won. The shift was slow, subtle. At first, it looked like Troy was just taking on more responsibility as the wedding got closer. He offered to handle the catering deposit. He chose the music playlist. He called the photographer directly, even though Evin had wanted to go with someone else. Every time Laurel or I raised a question, Evin brushed it off with a smile. "He's just trying to help," she said. "He wants to make things easier." But what we saw was different. We saw her voice getting quieter, her choices shrinking, her laughter thinning out like a candle burning at both ends. Then came the incident with her wrist. It was a Sunday morning. Laurel was setting out bagels in the kitchen. I was outside trimming hedges when I heard the door open. Evin walked in wearing a long cardigan, her face flushed from the heat. She reached up to grab a cup from the cabinet, and her sleeve slipped back just enough to reveal deep red marks on her left wrist. Laurel caught it immediately. "What happened to your arm?" Evin froze, then tugged the sleeve back down and said, "I burned it on the curling iron. It's nothing." But it didn't look like a burn. It looked like bruising from a tight grip. Laurel and I didn't say anything right then, but later that night, we sat on the edge of our bed in silence, both of us staring into the dark, both thinking the same thing. Something was wrong. I started paying closer attention to Troy, how he spoke to her, how she responded. I watched the way he touched her shoulder during conversations, not gently, but with pressure. I noticed how he made jokes about her forgetfulness, or how he laughed a little too hard when she said something he disagreed with. Then came the dinner party at his apartment. Troy had invited both families over for a small get-together. His parents flew in from Florida, and the night was supposed to be a chance for everyone to bond before the wedding. I arrived with a polite smile. Laurel wore her best navy dress and brought a bottle of wine. Yvonne greeted us at the door, her lipstick perfect but her eyes tired. During dinner, I listened carefully. Troy's father spent most of the time talking about his golf club, and his mother scrolled her phone under the table. But what caught my attention was the way Troy kept steering the conversation toward Yvonne's future, his version of it. He talked about the house they would buy, the career she would put on hold, the kids they'd have before she turned 30. Yvonne laughed politely at first, but her expression didn't match her voice. Her smile stayed frozen. She hardly looked up. Then Troy made a toast. He raised his glass and said, "To marrying into a family that actually knows how to plan for the future, especially financially." He turned and winked at me. I didn't smile. Later that night, I overheard him in the hallway. He was on the phone with a friend. I recognized the voice. He didn't know I was standing outside the guest bathroom. "Trust fund's locked for a few more years, but once we're married, I'll get her to move the timeline up. Worst case, I wait it out. It's more than worth it." I stood there, heart pounding, hand clenched. This wasn't love. This was a transaction. I walked back into the living room and pretended I hadn't heard a thing, but inside, I was done pretending. Laurel and I sat down the next day and made a decision. No drama, no confrontation, no emotional speeches, just action. We called our family attorney, the same woman who had helped us set up Yvonne's trust when she was 21. I gave her clear instructions. Create a prenuptial agreement with non-negotiable conditions. He would not have access to the trust fund unless he remained married to Yvonne for 5 full years, with no record of abuse, financial mismanagement, or legal infractions. Any divorce, infidelity, or coercion would result in automatic forfeiture of all access to the money. Not a dollar would change hands. We kept the document private. We didn't tell Yvonne yet. We didn't tell Troy. We waited. We watched him tighten his grip on her choices, her independence, her voice. Every time she tried to speak up, he wrapped his arm around her shoulder like a leash. Every time she expressed a new idea, he redirected it. I knew men like him. They always smiled in public. They always masked their intentions until it was too late. But this time, I wasn't going to wait for him to show his full hand. I already knew what he wanted. And I already had the one thing that would show me exactly who he was when faced with accountability. He thought the wedding was his final step. He thought the trust fund was within reach. What he didn't know was that before he could slip a ring on my daughter's finger, he'd have to sign his name on something far more serious, something that couldn't be undone. The night I made the decision, I didn't tell Laurel right away. I was in my study after midnight, sitting with the same legal pad I'd used 1,000 times before. It was covered in notes, draft clauses, scribbled names, and hypothetical timelines. In the middle of it all was a single circled word: protection. I'd written trust agreements, divorce settlements, military contracts, but never had I written a document that meant this much. This wasn't about money. It was about power. About shielding my daughter from a man who didn't deserve her, a man who saw her future not as something to build with her, but something to harvest from her. That morning, I called Dana Wexley, a friend and one of the best estate attorneys I'd worked with. I didn't give her every detail, just enough to make it clear this needed to be ironclad. I want it clear that if there's abuse, emotional, physical, financial, he gets nothing. If he cheats, nothing. If they divorce within 5 years, nothing. If she dies under suspicious circumstances, nothing. Dana was quiet for a moment. "You think it's that serious?" "I know it is." She promised to have a draft by the end of the week. I didn't sleep much that week. Yvonne was glowing, sending me photos of table settings, calling Laurel to talk about her vows. She sounded happy. But there was something in her voice I kept coming back to, something a little too cheerful, too rehearsed. Like she was trying to convince herself that everything was perfect. Troy had taken full control of the planning. The invitations listed his name first. The officiant was someone from his college fraternity. He'd even picked out the venue without her input, a country club 2 hours outside the city. "His uncle is on the board," Yvonne said. It was easier. Laurel and I knew we couldn't confront her directly. Not yet. If we pushed too hard, she'd dig in deeper. That's how people in her situation behave. They defend the person hurting them because they're not just protecting him. They're protecting their own belief that they didn't make a mistake. No one wants to believe they've been manipulated. So we waited, and we planned. 3 days before the rehearsal dinner, I received the final draft of the prenup. I read it twice, then had Dana courier it to me in hard copy. It was short, just 3 pages. But every word had weight. No access to the trust unless the marriage lasted 5 years without a single infraction. No early withdrawals, no amendments, no power of attorney clauses. The document even specified that Evin would retain full financial autonomy over all marital assets acquired before the wedding. And the moment Troy signed, he waived any claim to challenge the agreement in court. It was legal firepower wrapped in quiet language. I printed 2 copies, placed them in an envelope, and slipped them into the inner pocket of my blazer. I planned to give him one chance, one moment of decision, in public but just out of earshot. I knew what kind of man Troy was. Charm was his weapon, attention was his fuel, but the moment the spotlight turned on him and not in his favor, he'd fold. The rehearsal dinner was set at a private vineyard with a rustic barn-turned dining hall. The lighting was soft, the atmosphere warm, and everyone was dressed like we were posing for a magazine shoot. Laurel looked stunning in a deep green wrap dress. Evin wore a simple cream gown and barely left Troy's side. He smiled at every guest. He played the part. Toasts were made. Champagne poured freely. But I stayed quiet. I waited for the right moment. After dessert, I approached him. "Can I have a word?" I said. He raised his eyebrows but followed me to a small brick patio off the side of the venue. There was no one else there, just the sounds of music floating through the open doors and the hum of summer insects in the grass. He leaned against the stone ledge and said it as casually as if he were commenting on the weather. "You don't intimidate me. She's mine now." He said it with a smile. That's when I reached into my pocket and pulled out the envelope. I set it on the ledge between us. "Then I assume you've read the agreement." He stared at it, confused. "What agreement?" "The one that requires your signature before you get access to Evin's trust." His hands didn't move. His face didn't change right away, but his eyes did. That confident shine dimmed, like someone had flicked off the switch behind them. And in that second, I knew I'd made the right choice. I wasn't just protecting Evin's money. I was protecting her reality. Because when a man shows fear in the face of accountability, he's already told you who he is, and that meant it wasn't over. Not yet. He didn't pick up the document right away. His hands stayed fixed at his sides, stiff and motionless. I could see the muscles in his jaw clenching as he stared at the envelope like it was a trap. I didn't say another word. I wanted the silence to work on him. Eventually, he reached forward and slid it toward himself. He didn't open it. "I thought you trusted me," he said. I kept my voice steady. "This has nothing to do with trust. This has to do with accountability." He tried to laugh, but it came out dry. "You're throwing a prenup at me? The night before the wedding?" "You've had months to show me who you are. This is the summary." His hand tightened around the envelope. He finally opened it and pulled out the pages. He scanned the first few lines, then flipped straight to the clause about the trust. I could tell the exact moment he found it. The color drained from his face. 5 years? He said. "With audits?" I nodded. "You can't be serious." "I've never been more serious in my life." He tried to argue. "You do realize this makes it look like I'm marrying her for money." I stepped closer. "Then it won't be a problem." He turned away from me, paced a few steps, then came back. His face was red now. The arrogance was cracking. "You ambushed me." "Number, I gave you a choice." He threw the paper back on the stone ledge. "What are you going to do if I don't sign it? Tell her she can't get married." "You'll still get married, but you'll get nothing from her. Not her trust, not a piece of our family's estate, not a dime of marital assets she entered the relationship with." He scoffed. "She won't agree to this." "She doesn't have to. The trust isn't something she can change or dissolve. It's locked. If she chooses you over the money, that's her choice. But I'll sleep knowing I gave her the facts." His fists were balled now. His calm exterior was gone. "You're trying to humiliate me." "Number, I'm trying to protect my daughter from a future she hasn't seen yet." He opened his mouth like he was going to say something else, but then he saw my face. saw that I wasn't angry, I wasn't yelling, I was clear and calm and done, and that shook him more than rage ever could. I gave him a long look, then turned to go back inside. Just before I reached the door, I turned over my shoulder. Smile for the photos, or walk home. He didn't follow me. When I stepped inside, Laurel met me with a questioning glance. I nodded once. She knew I'd delivered it. Evan was in the middle of the room, laughing with her best friend, completely unaware of what had just happened outside. The next morning, Troy didn't show up for breakfast. No texts, no calls, just absence. Evan waited until nearly noon before going back to their apartment. When she walked in the front door, he was sitting on the couch, bags packed. She told us later that he didn't even try to lie. He said the prenup was a betrayal, said she should have defended him, that love didn't need paperwork. And that's when she realized something that broke her open. He wasn't upset about the trust fund. He was upset that he couldn't control it, couldn't control her. She said, "If you really loved me, the prenup wouldn't matter." He didn't argue. He just left. She came home that night and collapsed into Laurel's arms, crying so hard she couldn't speak. I sat beside her, didn't say anything, just listened. After a while, she lifted her head and said, "You knew, didn't you?" I nodded. She asked, "Why didn't you tell me sooner?" "Because you needed to see it for yourself." We all sat there in the quiet. No one tried to fill the silence. There was nothing to fix, nothing to explain. She was safe, and sometimes that's enough. In the days that followed, we canceled the wedding. Guests were refunded, the venue was notified, the florist and caterer understood. But more importantly, Evin started to come back to herself. She moved home for a while, took time off work, started therapy. It wasn't easy. Her heart was bruised, her trust shaken. But little by little, she stopped blaming herself. She stopped apologizing, and one afternoon she asked me to go for a walk, just the two of us. She reached into her coat pocket and handed me the prenup I had written. I read every word she said, "Thank you." I didn't say anything. I just took it from her hand and put it in my jacket. Not as a lawyer, not as a protector, as her father. Evin didn't speak to Troy again after he walked out. No texts, no explanations, no attempts to meet for closure. And to her credit, she didn't chase any. She let the silence be the answer. The days after the breakup were quieter than I expected. Not tearful, not explosive. Quiet, like the calm after a storm. She moved through the house slowly, like someone relearning the weight of their own skin. But even in those early days, there was something different about her. A kind of stillness I hadn't seen in months. Not broken, just done. She started waking up earlier. She helped Laurel rearrange the bookshelves at the shop. She cooked dinner with us. We'd find her out on the porch in the evenings with a cup of tea and a journal in her lap. She wasn't trying to erase what happened. She was processing it. And every time I passed her in the hallway or heard her humming softly to herself in the kitchen, I felt this steady sense of relief, not because she'd ended the engagement, but because she was returning to herself. I asked her once, a few weeks later, if she ever thought about calling him. She shook her head. I think I loved the idea of him more than who he actually was. I was in love with the story, not the man. That stayed with me. It's easy to forget that manipulation doesn't always look like shouting or bruises or slammed doors. Sometimes it sounds like flattery, like quiet control, like someone rewriting your plans until you can't tell where theirs end and yours begin. What Troy did was never technically illegal. He didn't scream at her. He didn't threaten her. He didn't leave scars. But he pulled strings behind smiles. He built a trap out of compliments and charm. And she nearly mistook it for love. That's why I don't regret the prenup. Not for a second. It wasn't a test. It wasn't a threat. It was a mirror. A chance to see the truth without the disguise. A good man, one with honest intentions, would have signed it without hesitation. He would have looked my daughter in the eye and said, "I don't care about the money, I care about you." But that's not what Troy did. He panicked, because the contract stripped away his leverage. It took the game off the table, and once he couldn't use the trust fund as a goalpost, he had no interest in playing anymore. The aftermath of that choice changed more than just Evin's relationship status. It changed how she saw herself. She told me one night, sitting on the back deck, "I thought I was weak for not seeing it sooner, but I'm starting to realize that leaving was strength." Saying no was strength. Learning how to start over, that's the part I'm proud of. She went back to work 2 months later. Not long after that, she found a new apartment closer to downtown. Smaller, simpler, fully hers. She started seeing a therapist who helped her reconnect with her boundaries and unpack what happened. She even joined a local women's mentoring group, speaking with younger women about how to identify emotional manipulation and build self-trust. And us? Laurel and I just kept being there, not hovering, not fixing, just present. Dinner at 6, hugs on demand, a quiet seat on the porch when she needed it. There's something sacred about being the safe place your child returns to when the world has tried to pull them apart. It's not about being right, it's about being ready. I learned something through all this, too. Being a father doesn't stop when your daughter turns 18. It doesn't end when she moves out or falls in love or stands at the edge of her future with stars in her eyes. Fatherhood is not about control. It's about backup. It's about seeing the cliff before she does and making sure there's a net, even if she swears she doesn't need one. That prenup wasn't a weapon. It was a net. And one day, if she chooses to love again, she'll walk into it stronger, with clearer eyes, with a voice that doesn't waver when something feels off. And if the man standing beside her truly loves her, he won't flinch at boundaries. He'll welcome them. Because real love doesn't get offended by protection. It proves itself through it. To this day, the envelope with that prenup sits in the back of my office drawer, not as a reminder of what almost happened, but as proof of what didn't. Evene is safe. She is healing. She is hers again. And that is the only outcome that ever mattered to me. If this story spoke to you, if it reminded you of someone you love or helped you see something more clearly, don't keep it to yourself. Like the video to support stories that matter. Share it with someone who might need to hear it. And if you believe in protecting the people we love, in standing up even when it's hard, subscribe to the channel. There are more stories like this, and I'd be honored to share them with you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below. What would you have done in my place? Have you ever had to protect someone from a truth they couldn't see? Thanks for watching. Take care of your people. And take care of yourself.